All right, hello, and welcome to Virtual Coffee Lunch and Learn Edition. Virtual Coffee's mission is to be a welcoming tech community that allows room for growth and mentorship at all levels and to create meaningful opportunities for learning, leadership, contribution for everyone. If you find our code of conduct, events, or learn more, you can check out our site, virtualcoffee.io. We are very glad to have you all here with us today, and I especially want to thank our presenter for being here, Kai. Kai is a DevRel consultant and mental health advocate. They run Taboola Rasa, a mental health awareness project that seeks to erase the stigma connected to mental health. I'm going to post Kai's little link tree here that has links to all of Kai's things going on in the world. So Kai's talk is about mental health. We rarely talk about mental health diagnoses and how they impact our daily lives and work, whether it's depression, burnout, bipolar, OCD, anxiety, or something else. Silence and hushed voices only create breeding ground for misinformation, discrimination, and stigmatization. To destigmatize the topic, it's up to us to make room for conversations about mental health, even if it seems scary to do so at first. Kai will talk about how and why openly talking about your mental health positively impacts others, how to share mental health experiences in a respectful way, and how to make it easier and safe for others to share their experiences. Thank you again, Kai, and why don't you take over?
Right. Just want to say, if you have any questions, please keep them for afterwards, because I'd love to do a Q&A. I will do the talk since I'm practicing it today, as I would at the conference next week. And also, if you have any feedback, feel free to take notes and either tell me here after or just message me on Slack or whatever. I'll be grateful for any feedback. Right. So I'm gonna share my presentation, which I should now actually be doing. Right. So welcome to my talk about mental health. I would like to start this off with some super juicy gossip. Have you heard that Chrissy Teigen had postpartum depression, or that Demi Lovato has bipolar disorder, right? Or, like there's something going on with Ezra Miller's mental state. Am I right? See, this was just for demonstration, but I would never talk about mental health that way, but it is how people and how we as a society often talk about mental health. We do it in hushed voices, behind closed doors, and with like leery curiosity because it's juicy and interesting. It's full of speculative judgment and often extremely stigmatizing. But over the past few years, I've noticed that something is changing, at least bit by bit. What's fairly new is that, for example, both Chrissy Teigen and Demi Lovato have disclosed and openly talked about their mental health struggles, by their own choice mostly, to raise awareness. Unfortunately, they've also both felt the repercussions of that from the media and the public, but they started talking about it. Now, I might not be famous, but I do share something with Chrissy Teigen and Demi Lovato. I too have started talking openly about my mental health experiences, and somehow that has changed things for the better, and not just for myself, but for other people as well. Sorry. My name is Kai, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm a tech content specialist sidestepping into DevRel. I also run a mental health awareness project called Taboola Rasa, and I will tell you how that came about. So 12 years ago, I went through a mental health crisis that profoundly changed how I interacted with the world. I was 26 years old when my dad died very suddenly, and instead of things returning to normal after a while, as one would expect, my grief just cascaded into something else. And despite regular therapy, I just wasn't getting any better. One second. A psychiatrist I was seeing floated ideas such as depression and my favorite, which was adjustment disorder, whatever the hell that is. But none of that felt right to me. And finally, thanks to a better psychiatrist, it turned out that I had previously undiagnosed ADHD, which then had led to a pretty severe burnout. And the grief about my dad dying, that was just the catalyst. The chances are that I would have burnt out anyways at some point in probably the next few years after that. So I got my ADHD diagnosis. I started taking ADHD medication, and I kept going to therapy. And very slowly, very, very slowly, I got better. Sorry. During that time, I also started talking openly about how I was doing with other people. I was talking to friends, to acquaintances, to strangers, and even on the internet. I wish I could credit this to some grand idea or noble thought or big plan that I had, but in reality, I was just simply too exhausted and burnt out to fake being okay anymore. So when someone asked, hey, how's it going? I would just tell them how I was doing. Like the filter didn't work, so I would just tell them how I was going. And I was like depressed, burnt out, exhausted, not great. I was not okay, and I wasn't able to hide it anymore. And these poor people I was talking to didn't realize at the time what they were in for when they used that empty, how are you doing phrase with me. But there we were, all of a sudden having a conversation about mental health that neither of us had actually planned for. I saw all kinds of reactions in those early days. Some people were really taken aback, and I can't really blame them for that. It was a mess. But many, if not most of them, got over their initial discomfort and started listening. And then they started talking. They started telling me about their own struggles with mental health, and they shared their worries about their loved ones with me. Like, I don't know, maybe a parent who has schizophrenia, a sister with ADHD, a friend with borderline personality disorder, colleague struggling with bipolar, or a child who has OCD. And as they talked, I could see relief flood them, relief at not having to keep this hidden anymore, at being able to tell someone safe to talk about it without fearing repercussions. My sharing was somehow empowering other people to open up and ask for help and seek support. And obviously I'd give what advice I had as a non-professional. I would point to resources, I would recommend therapists or psychiatrists. I would try to clear up misconceptions or simply just provide a listening ear and understanding. And during that time, I also started to notice how very little people often knew. Even now, 12 years later, with the media covering mental health topics more and more, there is still a severe lack of awareness about mental illnesses, such as depression, bipolar, anxiety, etc., or neurodivergence, such as ADHD and autism. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot of assumptions, and there's a whole lot of stigma attached to it all. Some of the misinformation can at least be entertaining. For example, I vividly remember telling someone I had ADHD early on after my diagnosis, and them going, oh, you mean because you need a lot of attention? Because it's attention deficit disorder. And I was like, yeah, I need a lot of attention, but that's entirely unrelated to my ADHD. I just enjoy the limelight. So at that point, I started explaining more about what ADHD is, and I feel like I haven't stopped since. But other times, the lack of awareness can also lead to very hurtful actions. So at about the same time, someone once weaponized their knowledge of my ADHD diagnosis against me by fairly maliciously and loudly asking, ha ha ha, have you taken your meds today? In front of a very big group of people. And that's not okay. And I was very uncomfortable in that situation. A different example, I was recently watching a reality show, and this guy asked his girlfriend, what's up with you? Are you bipolar? Because she was having mood swings. First of all, that's just not something you should ever say to someone. You probably know that, but I feel like I should say that. But additionally, this guy was also dead wrong, because those short-term mood swings aren't even a symptom of bipolar disorder. So we've got stigmatization, assumption, and misinformation all rolled neatly into one. I think the media is to blame for a lot of this, undoubtedly. But we who consume the media, we who arguably are the media, are to blame as well. We throw mental health disorders around as insults often enough. We armchair diagnose celebrities. We blame mental health experiences for bad behavior. Other times we use them as excuses for bad behavior. We make fun of symptoms and we mock people who exhibit these symptoms. So what it comes down to is that we either we talk about mental health with prejudice or we don't talk about it at all. And those are usually the only options. So how do we do better? As we established already, not talking about mental health is obviously not the way. So we need to find ways to talk about it in less harmful ways. We can work to create an environment where talking about mental health becomes a viable and safe option for someone, where people won't feel judged, misunderstood, or stigmatized if they open up about their mental health experiences. One of the easiest ways that everyone, and literally everyone, can contribute is by using inclusive language. I know it sounds deceptively simple, and you're probably thinking, Kai, how on earth are the words I use going to help? But Desmond Tutu supposedly said, language is a very powerful. Language does not just describe reality. Language creates the reality it describes. And I totally agree with that. I think language is extremely powerful. It's one of our main ways as humans to communicate with each other. And the language I use when talking about certain things is going to tell you where I'm at. Just imagine you're queer, but not out, and you're talking to someone and they say, ew, that's so gay. You wouldn't want to come out to this person, would you? Like, they would not feel safe to you. And similarly, we should also never use mental health conditions as adjectives, especially not as pejoratives. Just like we know not to disparagingly say that's okay, we should also learn not to say someone is so bipolar or that's crazy, or like he's crazy. Just because someone's upset with us or perhaps blew their lid, don't call someone borderline just because they treated you badly. What we need to do is we need to think of better words, words that actually describe what is happening rather than using mental health as a lazy and stigmatizing shorthand. If we're regularly calling other people crazy, psycho, lunatic, bipolar, manic, delusional, etc., stigmatizing mental health conditions and symptoms, how are we really surprised that people still have a hard time getting treatment for their mental health? And why are we doing it when changing our language is actually quite easy once we open ourselves up to it? For example, someone's crazy behavior can simply be described as irrational or unpredictable instead. And the thing with language having power is that language almost always gives us an alternative we can use instead of the hurtful thing. We just have to put a little effort into it. And even if the intention isn't to be hurtful, it can still end up hurting. Like if you don't mean to step on someone's toes, it's still going to hurt them when you do it. For example, I often hear people downplaying mental health conditions and symptoms. So that can make others feel like their experiences aren't impactful, like they're just being dramatic when they're seriously unwell. And that can also make it harder to get help. For example, once while I was in the middle of burnout, I overheard someone say, oh, I was so burnt out last week. And that took me aback, because did this person mean to imply that they cured their burnout from last week to this? Was I taking too long? Was I doing something wrong? Was I doing burnout wrong? Was I just being overly dramatic when I could barely move off the sofa because my whole body felt heavy and exhausted and painful? Because as everyone who's experienced burnout knows, there's no such thing as temporary burnout. If you were burned out last week, I have really bad news for you. You will unfortunately still be burned out this week and the next. Burnout isn't cured in a week. It takes 3 to 5 years, in fact, to recover from burnout. And if you didn't know this, I am so sorry I have to be the one to tell you. What this person did, while not at all meaning to harm me, and they weren't even talking to me, but what they did was take a serious mental health concern and use it to explain a fairly regular human experience, the feeling of exhaustion after a long week at work. Okay, but what could they have said instead? For example, they could have said, I was so exhausted last week, much more than usual. That doesn't downplay burnout. And they're still able to say how they are feeling and be taken seriously about it, which is also important because mental ill health encompasses more than just diagnosable mental illness. It doesn't start with a big breakdown. It's also the little things. And it's important to see that as well and acknowledge it. But what we need to do is distinguish individual symptoms from diagnoses. So, for example, you can really like order without having OCD. There's a difference between having a depressing day and being depressed. You can be bad at reading social cues, but that alone doesn't make you autistic. And a symptom of ADHD is difficulty concentrating, but that doesn't mean that everyone who has difficulty concentrating sometimes has ADHD. So when people borrow established diagnoses as a shorthand for how they're feeling, it blurs the lines between the fleeting experience or emotion that soon passes and a diagnosable mental health condition or neurodivergence that might seriously impact a person's life long-term. And that too makes it harder for people who are affected to seek treatment, because to them, it seems like everyone is struggling with the same things anyway. Like they don't realize the situation is different or more serious. Before I was diagnosed with ADHD, I thought everyone was having such a hard time doing their taxes. People don't like doing their taxes, but I was not able to sit down and do my taxes. But because everyone's saying, oh, I can't do my taxes, I hate doing my taxes, I thought I was just being dramatic, you know? For example, when I explain what ADHD is, people often react with, oh, but everyone has procrastination issues. But that dismisses the struggle someone with ADHD is facing because their procrastination issues are serious and heightened. So it's not just ADHD. So unless you actually have OCD or suspect you do, please don't casually say, oh, I'm so OCD. Instead, consider turning it into, I don't know, I like it when things are organized, you know? And if someone tells you they have issues concentrating because of their ADHD, don't downplay that by telling them that you sometimes get distracted too. Mental health experiences, and this is a much more serious situation, mental health experiences are often also used as an explanation for bad behavior. See Ezra Miller's recent news headlines, for example. Or like in Amber Heard's case, they're used to slander someone's character. Often enough, mental health also gets blamed for mass shootings rather than the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, racism, and lack of gun control laws, to just name 4 things. And these narratives inextricably tie mental health to bad behavior. Needless to say, it is entirely unhelpful for people who have gotten those types of diagnoses. In my case, the mistaken assumption that ADHD meant I was a stage hog was a fairly harmless mischaracterization. But the way the media has vilified Amber Heard while constantly underlining her diagnosis is severely stigmatizing. And I don't just mean for her, I bet it doesn't make it any easier for people who also have a personality disorder to be open about it. I do understand that people often have this innate need to look for reasons for all kinds of behaviors. But when we brand perpetrators with a certain mental health condition, that also stigmatizes the condition itself. So if someone who happens to have a personality disorder is violent and we start talking about that as if that's inextricably connected, then all people with that same personality disorder will be confronted with more stigma because the public will assume they are also violent. Of course, a lot of that is the media, as I said, and we have no direct control over what the media and other people do, but there are things we can do to counteract these stigmatizing conversations a bit. What you can do is you can change the way you talk about mental health and bad behavior and make sure you separate the two. You can also stop buying, and these days, most importantly, stop sharing media that stigmatizes mental health conditions and equates them with bad behavior. And if you're feeling really brave, you can even start calling out others when they talk that way. Basically, I am asking you to stop fanning the flames. Now, if you personally had or are having mental health experiences and are in a safe position to share without fearing backlash, then please consider talking about it. Be careful not to trauma dump. That's something I probably wasn't really aware of when I initially started talking about my mental health, but it's something I try to be conscious of now. But when a conversation veers into the area of mental health, that is your chance to share your own experiences. And you can also share on social media. Just make sure you use content warnings where appropriate. Talking about mental health takes it from being an abstract topic to something more relatable. It personalizes the topic. It's an opportunity to clear up misconceptions and shine a light on people's prejudices and preconceptions. And ultimately, it's a chance to educate and be educated. And those who were previously entirely clueless about mental health will hopefully walk away from these conversations with more awareness and more knowledge. And that in turn will make it easier for them to deal when they're confronted with mental health experiences in the future, whether it's their own or someone else's. But you sharing your story will be even more meaningful to those people who are also struggling with their mental health. It might just make them feel a little bit less alone when they see that you're just like them. And maybe they'll feel empowered to get the support they need. And maybe they'll even end up being brave enough to speak up as well at some point. Now, if it's not safe for you to share, please don't. I can never emphasize enough that your safety comes first. But if you can, consider talking about it. Personally, I find sharing to be a really powerful thing. I might have started sharing my story by accident at first because I couldn't fake it anymore. But when I first noticed that me being honest and open about my mental health helped counteract both the silence and the misinformation, it kind of felt amazing. And I wanted to do more than just tell my own story. So in 2016, I set up a mental health awareness project called Taboola Rasa. The idea behind it is to wipe the proverbial slate clean and remove the taboo around the topic of mental health by interviewing people about their mental health experiences. I believe the best way to create awareness and destigmatize mental health is to create room for conversations about it. Our society still isn't very well equipped for dealing with mental health stuff. Even just hearing about it can be extremely uncomfortable for most people. But staying comfortable never changed anything. So let's all do our part and start talking about mental health without losing our minds. Thank you so much for listening to me today. I hope you were able to take some helpful things away from this. If you want, you can find Taboola Rasa at taboolarasa.org. That's taboola with 2 O's. And if you have any questions later on or want to ask in private, feel free to contact me. I have a link tree set up for the Grumpy NB, and I'm the Grumpy NB on pretty much all socials from Twitch to Mastodon. That's it for now. Thank you so much. And if we have any questions right now, that would also be cool.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really awesome. I really appreciate that talk. I mean, it's a struggle for everybody, and it's easy to become aware of it. At least in my experience, becoming more aware of it myself, it's like really helped me become more aware of like my language and all of that stuff. This was a great talk. We have one question in the chat right now from Reynold. How do you distinguish between sharing your mental health struggles and trauma dumping?
I try to, like, so back then I was probably trauma dumping because it was too close still. I find with distance and a sense of humor, that's really helpful for me. But with distance, you can talk about things in a less triggering way. Like I mentioned that my dad died and that I had burnout, but I'm not going into all the details for you because the details are different for everyone. And also that would probably then veer into trauma dumping. Like a good way to measure is people's faces. Like the reactions are going into more of like shock than awe, then you've probably gone too far. It's also like it really depends on the person. Like if I'm talking to someone who I realize has some awareness of trauma and is pretty resistant to these things and not easily triggered, I can speak differently than if I'm talking to someone who's very fragile at the moment. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
I think the answer is it depends, right? Going back over
it
into
depends, and also like you learn over time, like you're gonna fuck up probably, and then it's gonna, next time you do better. What also helps is like trying to suss out what people need. Some people just need you to mention it and then the floodgates open, and other times people just stand there and they're just taking all the info in, and you know they'll go home with that later and sort it out there. Speaking of trauma dumping, it can also happen that people then trauma dump on you. That is something you have to be prepared for and find ways to guide them away from, steer them away from. You can suggesting online resources, psychiatrists, therapists, etc., bringing up stuff like that. So that's also to protect yourself, obviously. But that's also what I mean by like to only do this if you feel safe. It's not just do you feel safe with the people, but do you feel safe with your own mental state that you can handle talking about this.
Okay, we have another question from Michael in the chat. How do you feel like Easter eggs, like unpacking trauma stickers, say, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading this. How do you feel like Easter eggs, like an unpacking trauma sticker to say you are open to talk?
I'm clicking on that link now. I don't get it. I think I don't have enough coding knowledge to get that sticker. Trauma.
I also am not sure about it. It's a sticker with some command. Michael, can you
explain, please?
You can jump on, Michael, if you want, or in the chat. That either way is okay.
Yeah, so this is I don't know if you have to be logged in. I'm not logged in, but yeah, so it's a sticker from a creator on Etsy that is a Linux kind of turbo command for, it's the Linux command.
Oh, because you're unzipping the trauma.
A trauma archive, unpacking trauma. Right. And so it's very nerdy, very subtle, and if you know, you know. And so it's like having that sticker, like, as one of the stickers on your laptop, as kind of saying like, hey, like.
If I saw the sticker, I would probably think you're busy unpacking your own trauma, and I would not want to lay any more shit on you. Like, that's probably how I would react to seeing the sticker. Because I'd be like, oh no, this person is already unpacking trauma. I do not need to add more information to that. But I mean, a lot of this is it's not like I walked up to people and told them about my mental health. I was networking events, sitting with friends, meeting up with people, and they're like, how are you doing? I'm like, not that great.
Yeah, it's more like the opposite of what would be an appropriate way to really say that you are open to talking. So kind of the reverse of, instead of trauma dumping, of saying hey, how would I advertise?
I mean, that's the whole thing that I mentioned about, if you've had your own mental health experiences, one way to do it is to casually mention that, oh yeah, no, I don't know. So you're having a conversation with a couple of people and you're like, oh yeah, no, I've been if the conversation goes into that direction, even just not personally, but generally, oh yeah, I've been taking antidepressants, for example, or, things like that. You can drop these breadcrumb hints for people. And then someone else can be like, oh, this person understands and I can talk to them. And the other thing is, like I said, using inclusive language to signal that you're not going to judge that. I think I process this stuff consciously, when someone uses crazy and these kinds of words all the time, I'm like, this person's not safe. But I think a lot of people process this unconsciously as well. And if you make sure not to use this kind of language and actively create use inclusive language, and also maybe even just if it's social media or stuff like that, or among friends, you share news articles that are not judgmental or information about mental health and so on, you can you can establish yourself as a person that is okay to talk to. Like at this point, people just randomly message me asking about ADHD and things like that, simply because I've made it very clear that that is okay. Does that help? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, a lot of it is just like, you know, I don't know. So in the queer culture, I don't know, 50 years ago, probably, I don't know, I'm bad with time, the handkerchief signal, the pocket square signal, what people were into. And you can also use language to signal like that you're a safe person to talk to. I don't know if this was a good metaphor, but yeah. You just establish yourself as a safe person. Any
Randall,
other
he had a follow-up on there, but I'm not sure if we answered it already.
It's about assessing someone's reaction to what you share. Yeah, definitely as well. Like if someone is really taken aback, I will probably slow down and make it really simple or back out of the conversation. But I've not really had any reactions where people were like super negative. In most cases, people were just really relieved that I was laying my soul bare, and if they had something to say, like you're not going to judge me for it because you've gone through the same thing, you know. So trauma dumping happens more when you're like in the thick of it, I think. Like nowadays, I'm rarely in danger of trauma dumping on anyone about stuff that happened 12 years ago, you know. Back then it was raw, but now it's just part of what makes me me, I guess. Right.
I love that. Do we have any other questions or follow-ups or comments? Michael is
Yeah, I
US.
so in a different version of this talk, I was providing more of like guidelines to how to deal with the situation when someone needs mental health support, and that included a reference to there are various international crisis line numbers that you can call depending on where you live. So knowing about those is always a good idea. So,
yeah, Michael shared in the chat the US has a short code for a crisis line. It's 988, so you can
yeah,
similar to 911 in the US.
I think Samaritans are usually also a good place of call in most countries. I would very much advise against calling the police if you can avoid it, because they're not usually well trained to deal with mental health crises. Obviously it differs by country, but it's your last resort, your very last resort, usually.
Probably a good
Yeah.
call. Okay, well, thank you. I think we're going to wrap up unless anybody has any follow-ups. We very much appreciate Kai coming on. And they asked me to say, and I forgot at the beginning. I think that Kai mentioned it, but Kai is they're looking for feedback on this talk as well, because I believe you're planning on using it again in the future.
Yeah, I'm doing this talk on next Saturday at Pajamas Live. So if you want to give me feedback now, until like maybe mid next week, after that I'll panic about it. But yeah.
Yeah, well, in the spirit of content creation and everything like that, I know that Kai would appreciate constructive feedback in the channel or via DM and Slack, anything like that. I think would be perfect, right? And we will post the links when we get this up on YouTube. And yeah, I think that's just about it. So thank you again, Kai, so much for coming on and sharing with us. Thanks all of you for
having me.
I appreciate it a lot. For everyone else, you can follow the rest of our events, virtualcoffee.io. Oh, and I wanted to also really quick before we leave, shout out the mental health channel on our Slack. On Virtual Coffee Slack is a nice and warm place for people. And so if you're not in there and you'd like to share or just follow other people's talks, we also have a neurodiverse channel in there as well if you would like to share or learn about that specific aspect of mental health. So 2 mental health channels there in Virtual Coffee to join if you'd like, if you're not already in. And yeah, I think that's it. So I will wrap us up, and we will see you next time. Thank you again, Kai.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.